Why is society structured the way it is? And more precisely, why are our government structures formed the way they are? Have there been other alternatives? If we look at our governments, most are composed of a bicameral legislature, a Senate and a House of Representatives in the US, the House of Commons and the House of Lords in the UK, the Duma and the Federal Assembly in Russia, the Bundestag and the Bundesrat in Germany, and so on. As a matter of fact, 81 out of the one of the countries in the world, roughly 40%, have a bicameral legislature. But how did it all begin? When did we start creating these complex government systems, and why? In history, when trying to understand a subject in depth, the historian must endeavor to deconstruct more than just actions, but also the cause of those actions. If we are to truly comprehend why certain actions have taken place, we must dive and learn about the worlds and ideas that those actions are based upon. In trying to comprehend the modern age, the age of revolutions and the rise of democratic systems in Europe, we must start at the beginning. We must try to first understand the history, the great Enlightenment thinkers such as Hobbes, Locke, and Montesquieu, and the history that the great founding revolutionaries such as George Washington, Jefferson, Napoleon, and Robespierre, just to name a few, looked up to and tried to emulate and oftentimes tried to improve upon. In the Western world, that takes us to one place and one place only. For, as the famous quote often said, all roads lead there. That place is none other than Rome. But how did Rome begin? How did it all come together? And how did it come to influence everything we hold dear? My name is General Elias, and welcome to Historicity. Rome, the Eternal City, is located on the western side of the Italian peninsula, right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, or what the Romans would later term Mare Nostrum, our sea. Today it is located in the region of Lazio, but in ancient times this land was known as Latinium, or the Laurentian region, the Laurentian lands. By the end of the late Bronze Age, small villages started emerging around 7 hills next to the Alba River, today's Tiber River. These individuals were the Latins, but they didn't call themselves the Latin people just yet. According to myth and legend, the people who started inhabiting the Latinium region of the Italian peninsula around the year 1300 BCE derived their name from their king, Latinus. And the name of Latins was given to them by Aeneas, the hero of the Aeneid, by the great poet Publius Vergilius Maro, Virgil. As a matter of fact, the name was given to them by Aeneas in order to honor their king. But again, they themselves did not call themselves the Latins. The earliest term used by Romans to describe their ancestors was cascae, meaning the originals or the primeval ones, and aborigines, ab in Latin meaning from or at, and origines meaning origin, or those who were there at the origin and those who were there at the beginning, the originals. The professor and YouTuber Gioali Canestrelli, in his channel Europa Antigua, and the YouTuber Metatron provide a great breakdown of these terms and how they originated. in their videos titled Who Were the Latins and The Origin of the Ancient Romans, respectively. I highly recommend watching them both. Many authors in antiquity wrote about the origins of the Romans. One of the first to do so was Hellenicus of Lesbos in his Roman Antiquities, published between 430 and 405 BCE. There he mentions the Trojan origins of the ancient Latins and writes that the city of Rome was founded by Aeneas when accompanying Odysseus on his travels through Latium. Through the works of Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Livy, whom we are going to discuss later, we learn that other Greek historians whose works have been lost to history have also added to the mythological origins of Rome. One of these authors was Timaeus of Tauromenium, who is said to have used chronology and the rule of Athenian archons and Spartan ephors in order for him to provide a year-by-year breakdown of Rome's mythological history. However, also thanks to the work of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, we know that the very first Roman historian to combine the story of Trojan origins provided by Hellenicus of Lesbos and the myth of Romulus and Remus, which we'll discuss in detail later, was the Roman senator and historian Quintus Farius Pictor, around the year 215 and 200 BCE. And in doing so, he provided the Romans, who were in the middle of the Second Punic War against Carthage, with a national narrative that tied them to the greatness of the Trojan War and the Homeric epic, and none other than Mars, the god of war himself, as their biological father. Nothing like some good old school propaganda in times of war to inspire the young and gullible to die for the values and the interests of the old. Up until the point of history, the great writers of antiquity were writing about Rome and Roman history in Greek, but a great sign of things to come takes place at this point. Quintus Ennius writes his version of the history of Rome, the Annales, in Latin around the year 184 and 169 BCD, after the decisive decimation of Carthage. Basically, he was saying, guess who the new big boss in town actually is now? However, he did preserve and borrow Homer's hexameter, something which had not been done so beautifully before, and which after him became the standard for the great Roman historical epics. Quintus Ennius is also the first Roman historian to try to describe the original settlers of Latium, the region in which, according to mythological history provided by the previous authors, Aeneas and the fleeing Trojans moved to. He is the first Roman to call them Cascae in his first book of the Annales. He says, Quam primum Cascae, and there's that term, populae tenuere Latinae, which the ancient or primeval people of Latins held first, the primeval ones or the ancient ones. After him, the author to use the more familiar term aborigines to describe the ancient ancestors of the Romans was Titus Livius, Livy, around the year 27 and 9 BCE, in his Ad Curve Condite, from the founding of the city. He says, Ivi egressi Trojani, urquibus ab immenso proper errore mihi preter, arma et nave superetze, cum predam ex agris, ageren, Latinus rex aboriginisque, and there's the use of that important term by Livy, qui tum e tenevan loca ad arceden vin advenuram armati ex urbi arce abris concurru, which means the Trojans, who had almost nothing left from their immense mistake except their weapons and ships, were carrying out their spoils from the fields when King Latinus and the Aborigines, who then held those places, rushed together, armed from the city and the fields to repel the force of the newcomers, the originals or the ancient ones, according to tradition, mixed in with the immigrants fleeing the destruction of Troy led by Aeneas. And later, once this mix has occurred, once this mix takes place, That's when they start identifying together as the Latins, the descendants of King Latinus. But what happened to Aeneas, according to Titus Livius? Well, it seems that once he got to the Promised Land, like Moses in the Bible, he had already lived long enough. You see, as established in the previous paragraph, King Latinus and the Aborigines were not happy that the Trojans were invading their lands, so they marched to confront the invaders. According to Livy, there are two versions of the story. One says that Aeneas and the Trojans defeated King Latinus in battle. The other version says that King Latinus, before fighting as both forces faced each other, decided to ride his chariot forward and ask for a conference, a Populating. This was granted, and that once he found out that the forces in front of him were Trojan forces fleeing the disaster that had befallen their city, and that their leader was not known other than Aeneas, the son of Anchises and Venus, he made peace with them and gave his own daughter, Lavinia, to Aeneas in matrimony. This is how ancient peoples solidified alliances. The whole point was that from then on, they would be one people, the descendants of King Latinus and Aeneas. There was only one problem with that. King Latinus had already promised his daughter's hand to another person, the king of the Rutulians, an Etruscan city north of Latium, and their king, Turnus. So, Turnus, as expected, felt disrespected, and they went to war. Latinus, with the help of the Trojans, probably felt comfortable. However, even though they managed to defeat the Rutulians, Livy tells us, neither side could congratulate themselves on the result of the battle. The Rutulians were defeated, but the victorious Aborigines and Trojans lost their leader, Latinus. King Latinus died. King Turnus, on the other hand, wasn't defeated decisively, for he went to another Etruscan city, the city of Caere, and he enlisted the help of their king, Mezentius, and together they marched against Aeneas, Lavinia, the Aborigines, and the Trojans. Aeneas organized them and instructed them in battle, and started at that point referring to both nations as Latins, the people of King Latinus, their dead king. A brilliant move by a brilliant commander if you're trying to rally the anger and resuscitate the passions of soldiers who just lost their king and still need to defeat those responsible for his death. Together, fighting as one, the Latins crossed the Alba River, which was the natural border between the lands of the Etruscans and the lands of the newly baptized Latins, the lands of the Aborigines. And in the middle of the battle, in the waters, after victory had been awarded to the Latins, Venus convinced Jupiter to reach down, to take Aeneas into his hands and elevate him into the heavens, where he joined the other immortal gods, now as Jupiter in Venus. And that's what they went with. That's like if George Washington, while crossing the Delaware on his way back after defeating the British and the Hessian mercenaries in late 1775 and early 1776, fell into the waters of the frozen river. But, the Virgin Mary talks to God for him to reach down from the heavens, pick up Washington before he dies, and take him to heaven, from where he is watching all his descendants and making sure they do everything right. Right. In all honesty, I think the Latins felt a little bad going back to the village and telling everyone that Aeneas had fallen into the waters of the Alba River, had been carried up by the currents, had drowned in the process, and no one had been able to recover his body. It's probably a little hard to swallow if you lose two kings in the span of one war and you still dare call yourself the victor. This message has been brought to you by Propaganda. Now Aeneas had a widow and a son. Livy doesn't know whether this son, Ascanius, was also the son of Lavinia or of a previous relationship. What is known is that when Aeneas passes away, Lavinia, his widow, inherits responsibility over the city. During her reign, she kept the city safe, and as a result, it was baptized as the city of Lavinium. But other sources, especially Virgil, who we're going to discuss in more detail later, tells us that Ascanius was the son of a previous marriage, a marriage in Troy to Creusa, who sadly died as the Greek hero was trying to evacuate his family to safety as the city perished. According to Virgil, Aeneas, as Troy burned all around him, carried his blind father, Anchises, on his shoulders while leading his son, Ascanius, by the hand. His wife, Creusa, followed him, but in the chaos she got lost, and when he finally got to the rendezvous point outside the burning gates, she was nowhere to be found. So Aeneas turned back into the burning city, and as he entered the gates, he was met by her ghost, who then prophesied the adventures that were to come. Aeneas says, and this is the Robert Fagles translation, which by the way is magnificent, and I highly recommend everyone reads it. Why? I even dare fling my voice through the dark. My shouts fill the streets as time and again, overcome with grief, I called out, Creusa. Nothing, no reply, and again, Creusa. But then, as I madly rushed from house to house, no end in sight, abruptly right before my eyes, I saw her stricken ghost. My own Creusa's shape, but larger than life, the life I'd known so well. I froze, my shackles brittle, voice choked in my throat, and my wife spoke out to ease me of my anguish. My dear husband, why so eager to give yourself to so much mad flights of grief? It's not without the will of the gods these things have come to pass, but the gods forbid you to take Creusa with you, bound from Troy together. The king of lofty Olympus won't allow it. A long exile is in your fate. The vast plains of the sea are yours to plow until you reach Hesterian land, where Lydian Tiber flows with its smooth march through rich and loamy fields, a land of hardy people. There, great joy and a kingdom are yours to claim, and a queen to make your wife. Dispel your tears for Creusa, whom you loved. I will never behold the high and mighty pride of their palaces, the Myrmidons, the Dolopians, or go as a slave to some Greek matron. No, not I, daughter of Dardanus that I am, the wife of Venus' son. The great mother of gods detains me on these shores, and now, farewell. Hold dear the sun we share, we love together. Personally, I tend to believe this version more. You can disagree, and if you do so, please leave a comment down below. Which one of these two versions do you believe the most, and why? My reasoning for believing Virgil more is the following. Even by Livy's account, after 30 years of Lavinius' rule, and when he, Ascanius, reached adulthood, instead of waiting as a proper son would to inherit the throne of Lavinium with the passing of his mother, Ascanius goes up to the feet of the Alban hills and creates his own city, the city of Alba Longa. And in this new city, and with the descendants of Ascanius, is where the story of the founding of Rome really starts to take shape. Ascanius was succeeded by his son Silvius, who by chance had been born in the forest. He became the father of Aeneas Silvius, who in his turn had a son, Latinus Silvius. He planted a number of colonies. The colonies were called Prisci Latini. The cognomen of Silvius was common to all the remaining kings of Alba, each of whom succeeded his father. Their names are Alba, Attis, Capis, Capetus, Tiberinus, who was drowned in crossing the Albula, and his name transferred to the river, which became henceforth the famous Tiber. Then came his son, Agrippa. After him, his son, Romulus Silvius. He was struck by lightning and left the crown to his son, Adventinus, whose shrine was on the hill which bears his name and is now part of the city of Rome. He was succeeded by Proca, who had two sons, Numitor and Amulius. And this is where things really get interesting. The mythological founding of Rome started with these two brothers. Amulius, the second brother, wasn't supposed to inherit the throne, but he was incredibly ambitious, and no one, not even tradition, was going to prevent him from being king. He gave his brother a coup d'etat, replaced him as king, killed all his sons, in other words his nephews, and forced the only daughter of Numitor, Rhea Silvius, to become a Vestal virgin. Vestal virgins were like nuns. They took an oath of celibacy for life, which means that they will never have children. That's the only reason why he probably kept her alive. She has to spend all her time locked up in a temple and can never, ever touch a man or ever let a man touch her. However, as fate or the fates would have it, imagine Amulius' astonishment when she calls him in and all of a sudden she's pregnant. To do what he did and achieve what he achieved, he must have been a very systematic guy. So I imagine him asking her and asking himself, who was the father? Because that individual, whomever he might be, has to be dealt with, has to be eliminated even before the babies are born. They all now pose a legitimate problem for him, a legitimate threat to the role he now occupied within his society. But Rhea Silvius was no dummy. In order for her to save herself, her life, and that of her unborn babies, you see, she was pregnant with twins. As well as to protect the life of whomever the father was. She told Amulius that Mars himself, the god of war, had appeared in the temple and had his way with her, resulting in the pregnancy. Now, Amulius was faced with a dilemma. One, if he let the children live, once they grew older, they could exercise their claim to the throne, since in all reality he had usurped the throne, and their blood was their rightful bloodline. However, if he killed them, he was likely to incite the rage of the god of war himself, who would without doubt dispense a slow and painful death to Amulius. He chose a third option. Amulius threw Rhea into a prison after she gave birth and hoped to be able to feign ignorance, order his servants to take the boys to the Tiber River and throw them into the river so that they would drown. His servants did just that, but since the river was overflowing during that season, they didn't go into the deep areas and dropped the basket with the babies close to the shore. Soon the waters had receded and the basket was on dry land and the babies were saved. That's when, attracted by their cries, a she-wolf encountered the basket with the babies and decided to actually take care of them and suckle them. Also, at the same time, the king's flock master, a guy by the name of Faustulus, a shepherd, saw the she-wolf taking care of the babies and was so moved by them that he decided to raise them as his own. He took them to his house where they were raised by his wife, Laurentia. As they got older, they proved to be a little too wild for Faustulus. They loved hunting. They loved to take money from the rich, a la Robin Hood. They had their own little gang of young shepherds, which they led. And so one day, when the people of Alba Longa got tired of their antics, they arrested one of them, Remus, and took him in front of the king to be tried for stealing the lands of Numitor, his grandfather. Again, unbeknown to them, Amulius the usurper gave Remus to his brother to imprison him and enslave him. However, Faustulus, the adoptive father of the boys and the adoptive father of Remus, afraid for his life, confessed to him that Romulus and Remus were his long-lost grandchildren. He reminded him of what Amulius had done to him and reunited him with his grandchildren. And the old king at that point decided to reclaim his rightful throne. Romulus and his shepherds attacked the palace from one side, while Remus and another group of followers he had gathered attacked the palace from Numitor's lands. In the end, they succeeded. They killed King Amulius and restored their grandfather Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. Being ambitious young men, now with a multitude of followers, Instead of waiting to inherit the throne of Alba Longa from their grandfather, Romulus and Remus decided to build their own city. But not knowing who was older, they didn't know who should be king or whose name would be given to the city. And this is where the story of Livy first reveals the theme of the founding of Rome. Yes, it is a story about a city, it is a story about the origins of a peoples, but more importantly, it is the story of how a system of governance came to be and how those two forces started vying for power, influence, and equality within the city from its founding. Romulus decides to build his headquarters in the Palatine Hill. Remus, his brother, decides to make his headquarters in the Aventine Hill. These hills will soon become a representation of the entire population of Rome and the war that existed since its founding between two of the most important groups. The Romulus and the Palatines will represent the patricians, while Remus and the Aventines will represent the plebeians. Two brothers, one destined to suffer misfortunes. Remus is the one getting arrested. Remus is the one who has to be rescued. Remus is the one who soon will be killed by his other brother. And the other, cunning, a leader of shepherds, regal, cold, a murderer, willing to do anything and everything to get ahead and get what he wants. But the fight between these two groups goes farther beyond the groups themselves, for they too represent an even more existential battle. The battle between democracy, the rule of the majority, versus oligarchy, the rule of the powerful few. You see, Romulus and Remus can't agree on who will be king and whose name the city will bear. At first, 6 vultures appeared to Remus, and everyone thought that this was a clear sign. But then 12 appeared to Romulus. You see, even in prophecies, one side is wealthier than the other. For a time, the city had no name, and the city had 2 kings. Livy says, each was saluted as king by his own party. The one side based their claim on the priority of the appearance and the other on the number of birds. In other words, Remus and his people claimed kingship because the vultures appeared to him first, while Romulus and his people claimed kingship because more birds had actually appeared to him. Then, according to one account explained by Livy, Romulus started work on the walls of his city. Remus, not thinking much of his work, probably laughing and mocking his brothers' attempts to protect his city, decided to jump over Romulus's wall. And in a fit of rage, Romulus killed his brother and swore, "So shall it be henceforth with everyone who leaps over my walls." And that's how Rome becomes Rome. But this is not the complete story. Usually, there are very important elements left out about its founding that everyone, in my opinion, should know. The most important thing about the founding of Rome is what happens later, for the city ends up becoming the refuge of runaway slaves, criminals, and the downtrodden. Romulus gives them a code of law. He gives Rome traditions to follow, many of which he plainly stole from his neighbors, the Etruscans, such as the seat that kings used to rule from, their throne. He copied the Etruscan seia curulis and the toga praetexta, the style of dress that important people, the senators and politicians that will represent Rome, wore. The main design styles people usually associate with the city and the empire, he literally stole these from the Etruscans. A very Roman thing to do, if you ask me. But most importantly, Livy tells us he created 100 senators, either because that number was adequate or because there were only 100 heads of houses who could be created. In any case, they were called the patres, in virtue of their rank, and their descendants were called patricians. He officially creates and delineates the classes that will compose Rome. The patricians are the founders. They get to have a political say, and then you have everyone else. He is founding a monarchy, but someone once said that every monarchy, every dictatorship, every autocratic government is not really autocratic in nature, but it's in a lesser form an oligarchy. Every single ruler is going to need a circle of trust they empower in order for them to do the ruler's bidding. This is what Romulus created with the Senatus, which comes from the Latin word senex for older men. He created a council of older men. It was not a democratic tool for all the citizens of Rome to have power, but for those families, the oligarchic circle that helped him run Rome more efficiently, to share in his power, to share in his influence, share in his wealth, and to insulate the elite group of founders from the fate of the masses. This is a principle we still have today. The Senate, a council which, just like in ancient Rome, did not at first represent the interest of the people, but the interest of the powerful and influential. But those are the patricians. How did the plebeians, come to be? Well, Livy tells us in his book 1.9 of the Ab Urbe Condita that these patrician families were mostly composed of men, and not only these families but everyone else who had taken refuge in Rome, the plebeians too. Remember, Rome was an open city, a città aperta, to runaway slaves, debtors, criminals looking for a place of refuge, and these were mostly men. Realizing that a city or a society with no women, no marriage and children, no families was doomed to face populational decline, Romulus, and I'm certain the Senate, devised a plan. They came up with a series of games, the consualia, to be hosted in their city, kind of like the Olympic Games, in honor of the equestrian Neptune. They invited their neighboring cities to participate and partake in the celebrations, and these, wanting to honor the god, accepted their invitation. It was so successful that Livy tells us that the whole Sabine population came with their wives and families. These people were curious. They wanted to see what the Romans were up to, what the city looked like, what their streets were like. They wanted to visit this impertinent city being formed under the seven hills. Livy tells us they were invited to accept hospitality at different houses. And after examining the situation of the city, its walls, and the large numbers of dwelling houses it included, they were astonished at the rapidity with which the Roman state had grown. In other words, they were fed, they were given wine, they were shown around, and when the sports, the main event, was about to begin, the signal was given, and the young men of the city kidnapped the young women among the guests and took them to their houses, leaving their fathers and brothers in the center of the city confused. The most beautiful women were given and reserved for the patricians. Very Viking of them, if you ask me. Their parents fled in grief, according to Livy, went to their countrymen, came back with armies to fight Rome, but Rome proved victorious. And that's how Rome was populated. From this point on, it would grow in population and size. From the conquest of its enemies, it would grow in size until most of the known world belonged to the Romans. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It would help us a lot with the algorithm and to share these type of topics and content to more similarly minded individuals. Also, leave a comment below and subscribe.